Welcome to this episode of Bounded in a Nutshell. Remember to take a moment to click on the link below to donate to a very special organization. Figure Skating in Harlem is the first organization in the world to combine the power of education with the grace and discipline of figure skating. It is dedicated to developing confidence, leadership, and academic achievement in young girls from low-income backgrounds. The numerous stories of success from its alumni owe a great deal to the unique blend of mentoring and self-expression that is championed by FSH. Remember, no donation is too small or too large to keep the dream alive for these exceptional young girls. Thank you very much. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Bounded in a Nutshell on this Wednesday afternoon, I keep saying morning. My guest today, a graduate of the Tisch School of Performing Arts, Glenn Fleshler, has appeared in numerous theater, film, and TV projects. Known for his portrayal of George Remus in Boardwalk Empire, Dr. Cordell Dumlin in Hannibal, the disturbingly chilling Errol Childress in True Detective, and me and my watching brother's fave, the hilariously villainous Goran Pazar in Barry. He can currently be seen playing FBI agent Tony Prince in Netflix Waco. His other television credits include Sex and the City, Law and Order Special Victims, Fringe, Third Watch, Blue Bloods, The Good Wife, The Following, and The Watchmen. His film credits include Blue Jasmine, A Most Violent Year, The Rendezvous, Suburbicon, The Seagull, and The Joker. His Broadway credits include Death of a Salesman, Guys and Dolls, Arcadia, and The Merchant of Venice. Off-Broadway, he has appeared in Measure for Measure, Pericles, and Lear. It is a pleasure to have the fabulous Glenn Fleshler as our guest today. Hello, Glenn. How are you doing?
Doing good. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. God, lots of questions, but let's start. I would love to know where the journey started for you becoming the actor that you are now. Where did it all start? Where's home?
I started in Queens, New York, in Floral Park. Yeah, just, you know, it's a very boring childhood story.
Were there other people in your family involved in the industry to get you started on this whole journey?
Not really. My mother actually went to a couple of years of performing arts high school and, you know, dabbled, but not in my lifetime, you know, but my parents were big theater goers, and we watched a lot of movies, watched a lot of TV. I listened to a lot of radio. I threw myself in, you know, nobody remembers when it began. They always said from the womb I was acting. So I didn't know, you know, exactly where that passion was going to lead me, you know, comedy, music. You know, it wasn't until later that I became sort of a dramatic actor, but I devoured it. I devoured all of it. I loved it all. TV, film.
Right.
Whenever I could go to the theater, and I was lucky that I grew up in New York and that I had parents who would take me to Broadway. So intoxicated by all of it. Yeah.
And what, do you have any sort of early performances that really struck you, that made you go, I really want to do this, if that actually ever happens for real? But do you remember any that were particularly important for you?
They all did, from like going to see like the kids older than me in grade school productions. I mean, I was a sucker. My first Broadway show was Grease.
Wow. Was that with Richard Gere doing it, or was that?
I don't know who was in it at the time. Right. It was the original production.
Yeah.
And my mother always tells the story of how I didn't want to stand up at intermission because I was worried they would start without me. So I saw Jim Dale play Barnum when I was, I don't know how old I was, maybe 10 or 12. Yeah. That was a defining experience. But then there was also just like everything that was on TV, movies, you know, all of it.
Yeah, yeah. And how did Tisch come about? Was there a point where you remember deciding, I want to go to NYU and all that, you know?
Well, I had studied with a couple of people who, in undergrad, who taught there. The program was really just taking flight on the kind of national level at that time. Mm-hmm. It was a little newer to the party than a couple of the other big schools. But I had gone on the road with a company called the National Shakespeare Company for 2 years. That was my first headshot I sent out. It was my first job out of college. It turned into 2 years of work. It was a great learning experience. I traveled the country in a bus and truck and did, do Shakespeare plays at the time. We would do a comedy and a tragedy. And, I was, having the feeling of starting an acting career. Something was happening, but there was a lot of mystery to it, as I'm sure a lot of the people watching can relate. There's a lot of mystery of like how you get started and what's next and how to move forward. And I think in the back of my mind, I always wanted some kind of conservatory training. I had trained in undergrad, but more in the sort of liberal arts college kind of way, learning a lot of theater history, dramatic literature, reading, the canon, which is a great thing to do, to just kind of immerse yourself in the dramatic literature. And I got to play incredible roles in college and, get to be a leading man and have those performance experiences. But I always dreamed of having a conservatory experience where you do nothing but act, and study acting and do that around the clock. And we definitely provided that.
Yeah. And how did I know I have mixed feelings about the conservatory experience in drama school. For me, that first year where they destroy any illusions you have that you're a great actor, which is fine. But I remember in my experience, that happened very successfully, destroying those illusions. And then they put me in the graduating classes production of Lear as Edmund, which is not what you want to do with low confidence. So I have a very mixed bag about drama school. How did you enjoy that intensity and that scrutiny and that dusting yourself off?
You summed it up perfectly, I think. Particularly the first words you said, which were mixed feelings.
Yes.
When I look back on that time, there's a lot of mixed feelings and a lot of feelings in general. It was an incredibly raw, emotional time. There were a lot of people around me, because I had worked some professionally, who were concerned about me going to graduate school, that it was going to corrupt, something. And I was not worried about that so much. I thought, no, I want to get better and I want to work and work and work. And I came incredibly hungry. But there was a lot of resistance when I got there, the sort of tearing you down part of it that you talked about, and the confidence thing. And, probably I needed to go through that, but it was done in such a way that I felt a little bit adrift for periods of time. But I have to say, I learned an incredible amount there. And I think that's the most important thing. And the most important thing for anyone who's pursuing this as a career and who's young is to learn as much as you can. I mean, it really never stops. It hasn't stopped to this day. But particularly when you're young and you have the opportunity to just throw yourself into studying however you do it, whether it's in grad school or in individual classes or learning on the job, which a lot of people do. There's people that grow up in the industry who have to learn as they do it. You got to be a sponge, because, it's such a competitive business, and you need every edge you can get. So that's what I wanted. And I did have an opportunity to learn from a lot of great people.
So did you, here's my question. You mentioned how dramatic acting sort of came later into the mix for you. So did you want to do, I saw you were in Guys and Dolls. I had no idea you sang, Glenn. I mean, Jesus Christ, I didn't know you did you want to do more comedy or focus on clowning or focus on musical theater? So, I mean, what were you looking to do when you came out?
It depends what time in my life you're talking about, but the general answer to that question is I want to do something different than the thing I did before. So I was always looking to do something different. I want to do a little bit of everything. And I'm very lucky in my career that I got to do that. It's funny that you mentioned Guys and Dolls, because there was a brief moment in my career where suddenly all I was getting offered was musicals. And I don't feel particularly qualified to be in Broadway musicals, but I found myself in a long-running one called Spring Awakening, which led into Guys and Dolls. And all of a sudden, the musical theater community was aware of me, and I wasn't getting the other kinds of work I wanted to get. And I thought, well, maybe this is it. And it did allow me to make a Broadway salary and stay in the and it opened a lot of other doors ultimately to my career. But there was a moment where I thought things have taken a very strange turn as a classical actor.
Yeah.
But in the back of my mind, I always thought, well, this is, like I mentioned, going to see Grease and Barnum and seeing like the original Wiz and Pippin. And I saw all these shows as a kid that were musicals. So I thought there was something about it that was unfinished business that I would end up, in a couple of Broadway musicals and get to experience that. And what I really got out of it is just incredible respect for the people who really do that stuff.
Oh my God. Yeah.
They're just humble. They're like assassins there,
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've met Angela, my wife. She's a musical theater person, and just the rigor of the whole thing. And I often think to myself that there's the side of me, Glenn, that says, I do want to have one go at a musical before I die. Do you know what I mean? But then I think about the rigor. I think of what it feels like for me when I've got through a song without making a fool of myself. And I said, the idea of doing that 8 times a week and coming back to terrifies the hell out of me. I mean, it's such a discipline, isn't it?
Well, I remember talking to friends of mine who were very gifted in that realm and could do that before I ever sniffed not only a musical but being on Broadway at all. And I would ask them about it, and they would say, "Oh, they'd sing these incredible, songs and arias, and do all this technical stuff that's really." To me, mind blowing. And they would say, "Oh, I was totally gone. I was totally mentally gone."
Wow.
Oh, I wasn't there. I've done this show hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine that, a college like that, and not being, completely focused. And so that was a sort of part of the journey of doing a long run on Broadway.
Did you get to that place where you could your body knew what it was doing?
I made myself crazy because my mission was to never be bored.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice to have the experience of a long run for the security of it, and because it was so different than most of my theatrical life.
Yeah, and actually making decent money doing it.
Yeah, all of that stuff was great, but artistically, I wanted the challenge of, because I really didn't understand how you did it. Just like you're asking me now, I did not understand, like, how do people do things for years? And, I wanted the challenge. And people talk about, oh, it's golden handcuffs. Like, you're making a good salary, but your career kind of stops because you're in the same show for, some people really do these shows for years. It's so I didn't want to do that the rest of my life, but I wanted the experience of, like, how do I do a show for a year or more? And I made myself crazy because I tried to play it like jazz and be fresh every night. And that was good. That was good. But it also, your mind starts to play tricks on you because your body is fighting you, because there is muscle memory. That says, I've done this 300 times.
Relax.
And there were days where not only did I not remember what happened, but like I wouldn't remember how I got home the night before. Even like the subway ride and the whole routine of it, getting in and out of the clothes, can really just, you can easily go onto autopilot. But mostly I was, just driving myself crazy, trying to stay fresh and breathe and find new things. And
so what was the first dramatic thing that came after the musical run? Do you remember?
Well, the day after I closed Spring Awakening, I went into tech for Guys and Dolls. So I did 2 publishers at home. The odd thing about this for your audience is that, I was well into my 30s. Like I said, I had never sniffed a Broadway show. It started to become a meme in my head that, like, never cast me on Broadway. I'm not right for that. I'm doing downtown theater and I'm doing regional theater. The weird thing was, once I got a Broadway show, it led to 6 Broadway shows in 5 years. And that was basically my entire Broadway career in a very brief period. But by the time I got out of Guys and Dolls, I was starting to feel like I didn't want to be on stage anymore. So that was the other side of it. The one side was, it gave me sort of security. It started to change my career to a point where I thought, like, things are happening the way I once imagined that they might. The other side of it was that I was getting sort of mentally and physically exhausted, and then emotionally. I don't know, there were things, mysterious things happening to me from doing something that started to feel unnatural in a way. I think so then I went through a period where I, like, understudied Christopher Walken in a play, and then I did like a couple of scene part in a show. I did an ensemble thing with Pacino and Merchant of Venice. And then my last Broadway show was with Mike Nichols, and that was Death of a Salesman.
Yeah. Yeah.
By that time, and I wasn't sure I was going to do that show. And by that time, I was like, you know, I had started on Boardwalk Empire. I had started to get some recurring roles in TV, more film, and I was kind of shifting my career that way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of your roles right now. When I met you, which was when we did Lear together with Dan Sullivan at the Public, I think I had just seen you, just purely accidentally, in True Detective, that amazing performance of Errol Childress. I just have to ask, I mean, I think we saw you right at the beginning of the season, then we saw you for the last, and then you came back, you know what I mean, and then just completely dominated. Was that, I mean, tell us a little bit about a character like that, building a character as disturbed as that, and is that something you do quite easily?
I don't know about easily. First of all, we first met doing a workshop of Richard II. That's the first time.
For Tafana. That's when we met in like 2012, wasn't it? Yes, you're right. That's where we first met. Yes.
And then again on Lear. Errol Childress. Yeah. I don't know that I would say easily. I mean, I think that people see me for roles like that. Yeah. When that came about, I think that very year, I got maybe 3 or 4 auditions for really dark roles. And, you know, which wasn't strange, but, you know, they were kind of meatier parts and interesting projects. And I thought, well, this is really, you know, there's really some dark, intense stuff. And I was sort of weighing my feelings about doing those kind of parts. And I said, well, it's fine until I book one of these, you know, and we'll see what happens, you know. And the interesting thing, it was a long process with True Detective, because I met with the guys who created it, and then something happened where like they couldn't get back into New York, or I don't remember if there was a hurricane. Oh yeah, there was a hurricane. Yeah. And I was stuck in Texas, and they were stuck in wherever they were coming from. And so then finally we met again. I did some improv for them. Very strange process. For that. But the funny thing about it was that it was a guy, of all the twisted characters I was starting to see, who turned into different people. Yeah. And that made sense to me. You know, my role in Spring Awakening had been playing 9 different people. I had made a career in theater in the early years, playing multiple roles. I was that guy because I hadn't gone into my sort of character actor self yet, and I wasn't quite a young leading man anymore. And so I was trying to work, and a lot of it was like, you know, transform into these different people. That was sort of the skill that I was developing and what I was enjoying doing. But it also pushed me to like have to really make very fine choices if you're going to play multiple people in one show. So it was funny to me that I was like, oh, this is kind of the show that's becoming my break. And it's not only a dark, twisted character, but it's somebody who transforms, who has to transform. He's supposed to be sort of ordinary when they meet him, you know, kind of with one kind of accent. And then there's like this disturbed voice underneath it from all these sort of abuse he's had. And then he's grown up watching these old movies, and he takes on different personas. There were different, some of that fell by the wayside in the final show, but in the script, there were, you know, references to Andy Griffith and to different films. And so that was a lot of my research, was just throwing myself into that. And, you know, my conversations with the writer, Nick, were just about how his brain was kind of a funhouse hall of mirrors from this kind of generational abuse that had gone on. So it was actually quite painful to live with, because then I had many months to think about it. It was nice to have time to prepare it. Yeah. Also, you know, kind of quite an unpleasant thing to live with. And then I would fly across the country to New Orleans and get off the plane, and then we tried different beards and hairstyles, and the character had to age 17 years. And then Carrie, the director, would say like, nah, I don't want that. Is that how you're going to talk? Or things like that, you know? So it was a real, you know, process of refining and tweaking. It was interesting how how it turned out, because it really was a lot of different, it was a real lesson in filmmaking and how there's so many cooks, and it takes a little bit of magic, a little.
Well, let me ask you about that. This whole, I mean, a lot of the guests that we've had have talked about the difference for them in owning a role on stage versus, I think, who was it that put it this way? One of my guests put it that, I think it might have been John Lithgow, that said that in film and TV, it's all about giving the editor all this raw material to then go and shape your performance for you later on. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about, again, specifically for our audience, that transition from theater and what we consider playing characters on theater compared to the skills of doing that on to the camera? I mean, it's a lot more than just speaking softer and quieter, isn't it? Like, if you were to give a really brief idea of what that transition is for you, what would you say that is for the two mediums?
I taught a class recently. Somebody asked me to teach an on-camera class, which I thought was funny because I came to the camera late in my career.
Yeah.
I always felt a little bit like I don't fully know what I'm doing, and
which is ridiculous for us to hear that given the performances. But yeah, go on.
Well, I've always believed that it's you're always learning and it's a life's work, and I've given myself that license in particularly in the on-camera thing. I did reach a point on stage where I felt like I could accomplish anything I wanted to accomplish, and on camera it's taking me longer. I think those people who start really young, they just have this naturalness with the camera that, if you don't have that and you start to be at all self-conscious, then you have greater obstacles to overcome with it. But anyway, I was asked to teach this on-camera class to a bunch of NYU alums from my same acting program. And a lot of them there were a few older people, but a lot of them had sort of graduated in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what we were going to do exactly, but ultimately what it became about was that, I asked them for their experiences. Some of them had done their first guest shot on a show or a film, and all the strange experiences we all have, particularly the first couple of times you do it. It can feel like another world. And what I boiled it down to is that actually they know what to do because they trained at NYU. They have the same training that I do, but they assume that they don't, And so all of the distracting things, or the fact that you can walk onto a set of an established show and that there's a whole clique of people there who all know each other, or some people don't seem to be taking it seriously, or some people work in such a way where they're just bullshitting until it's action, you know your own process and what you need, and you have to take that space just like you would backstage at a play. It's just that you can easily forget that and assume that everybody there knows better than you, particularly starting out. So it's important to just kind of protect yourself in that way for whatever you need to do to prepare. And on every project, for me, it's been different. Just like I said about the stage, I always want an experience to be different. I treat every experience as its own experience. Every director works differently. The chemistry with the actors is different, and the roles demand different things. So I have done projects where I'm the one bullshitting, up until action, and I've worked with people like Julianne Moore, who is brilliant at just like talking about her kids and the soccer game or whatever, and then action, and then there's tears rolling down. Annette Bening will improv in character with you up until action. It took me a while to figure out that that's what she was doing. You know what I mean? She'd be like messing with me and like picking it, and then I realized, oh, she's trying to build the rapport of our characters and the friction. And other people are just in their own zone, and that's fine, and you have to respect that. And I've done projects where recently I did a television show called For Life that just on ABC. And it turned out that the character took quite a turn and had this incredible backstory. And I thought the only way I'm really going to be able to accomplish this is to really protect my space and carry this, because otherwise I'm not going to believe it myself. If I don't, it's not the kind of thing, even though it's a network show and the vibe could be a little bit different, a little looser. So I made myself a playlist of songs, and and then I would just come with my headphones, and you know, the assistant directors learned to respect that and to kind of when the time came. And you know, I'm not usually that guy. You know, I wouldn't. You know, I don't know what I would think of somebody doing that, but in this instance, that's what I needed to do. You know, otherwise I wasn't gonna. You know, I needed to just be in that world with that focus and carry a certain pain. Not that dissimilar to Errol Childress, actually. But, you know, the strange thing about True Detective was there was so much hair and makeup, you know, 4 to 6 hours.
you could use that mask, you know.
So really, I had this little group around me of like hair and makeup people, and that was sort of my world. And that kind of it, you know. Yeah. And
so well, talking about the different sort of processes and different characters, let's jump forward to one that has, I literally was falling off the floor laughing, and that's your work in Barry, playing Goran Pazar. And I just love knowing you, having seen you do, you know, the work you've done, the darker stuff you've done, and, you know, to see you play that guy was, I feel very transformational and stuff. Tell us a little bit about the process of being on a show like that, which I might be wrong, but it just seemed like people were allowed to like really exercise their sort of comedic and improvisational skill sets and stuff, but maybe I'm wrong with that. You know, tell me a little bit about you and NoHo Hank. I mean, the actor that plays NoHo Hank. Wonderful. And two of you, again, he's someone I know from a lot of dramatic work, you know, like dark dramatic work. So for me, it was fascinating watching two people I know from that realm using whatever skill sets they have to do this incredibly hilarious double act. You know, you guys stole every scene you were in. So tell me a little bit about that, you know.
Bill, I had spoken to Bill Hader on the phone before I got the job, and he was tweaking the script a bit. So he had called me to say, or had me call him to say, here's where I'm thinking it might go. And, you know, I've rewritten the scene a little bit. Would you do it again? And so I did it again. And then I did some improv based on what we talked about. And it was, I was going through a period where I'd started to do a lot of self-tapes, which is something that people coming into the business now, if you haven't already started to do, you're going to learn how to do. And the great thing is we have the technology now to do that from our home. And
excellent.
But I was working really hard on a lot of stuff. And sometimes, you know, the casting director would say, hey, can you do it again? You know, with this note. And I think like my kid was sleeping and I had to like stay up all night to do that for 5 hours while, you know, my baby was sleeping. You know, like, they'll just toss it off again. Now, if you were in an audition situation, you know, to be fair to them, they would be able to say, you know, give you an adjustment, you know. But I started to get frustrated with that sort of the middleman part of that whole thing. And I thought, show what I did to the people who are making the decision. And I had just gone through that when they said, oh, this thing Barry, which I really didn't think much about. I think it was like the first audition of pilot season, and I tossed it off. And then they said, oh, well, he may want you to do it again. But the fact that they said, talk to Bill Hader on the phone, I said, I'm not going to pass that opportunity up. And the difference was incredible because, again, you're dealing with the person who's making the show. So now he's giving you insight into where I think this might go, you know, what I think it's about. And now it's opened up a whole channel for me to ad lib and create this character. And he told me a little bit about who Hank was. And then, you know, the NoHo Hank thing was one of those magic things where you walk in a room, you don't know a person. I'd never met Anthony before. And we just had that dynamic from the beginning. And they would just keep the cameras rolling and we would ad lib. I mean, we did whole ad libs on like what was on his phone. We're looking at a blank screen, but he's like doing video games and we're doing all this stuff. And we would just go and go and go. And it just happened that way. You know, sometimes you get lucky and the chemistry is there. And Anthony's so brilliant and he created such a hilarious character. And we yin and yanged off each other pretty well.
It was just absolutely brilliant. I mean, the only reason I said I would sit there with my wife laughing. My brother got me onto this show and just going, they had to improvise. There's no way that's scripted. It's just so, you know, so it's
a lot of times people say, was that fun? On a lot of jobs that I've done, because they're darker, where they're not fun. Sometimes they are, but sometimes the work comes out good, but it's like, it's not exactly.
It's hard. It's not exactly. You wouldn't use the word fun.
Luckily, I can say with Barry, because a lot of people have asked me, like, that looks so fun. I'm like, yes, that was totally fun. But more than just ad-libbing, because the scripts are very funny. Sometimes when you say like ad-libbing or improving, that denotes that like the script isn't strong enough. I mean, Bill and Alec write those things within an inch of their life. They're very carefully crafted, but because of their comedy background, they're confident enough to say, keep the cameras rolling, or they'll throw out lines at you, or we come in with ideas. So that, particularly that cast, there were 6 of us series regulars in the beginning, got to feel like we helped create that show. We helped shape it. Bill, to his credit, because he was in his first time creating a show like this. We would do like a table read, and then we'd go up in smaller groups into his office, and he'd say, I like when you did this in the read, or what do you think about that? And we'd start ad-libbing around the table, just in small groups, to just shape it for the pilot. And Alec Berg would sit there typing, and I'd say, don't write that down. I'm just bullshitting, whatever comes out of my mouth. And he's writing stuff down. So, we felt a sense of ownership. And from there, once they knew us, once we felt like we'd really explored the characters, then they knew how to write it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really quite brilliant work, amongst other things. Let's talk about a bit about this, your love of the classics and stuff, because you did a film with another one of the guests, Corey Stoll, The Seagull, and all that, and Chekhov on film. And how do you feel about translating the classics onto film as opposed to your experiences with them on stage? Is it something you enjoy doing or have had a chance to do much of?
Yeah, well, the nice thing was that was a part, that part Shemraev that I played in The Seagull is the kind of part that I would get offered all the time in the theater, and I'd sort of grown tired of. And probably I wouldn't want to play that part on stage. But doing it on film turned into so much fun. I mean, unfortunately, they pared that movie down. It's very tight. It's a fun movie. I think it's a nice adaptation, but they really focused on the lovers. And so a lot of the stuff we did fell by the wayside, which is what happens in film. But I felt like I got more juice out of it, because on a film, on a stage, we have to sit there for hours and not really get much play. Whereas, in just these little moments, I don't know, I just felt a larger part of the whole. And the interesting thing about that particular film was that it required a group of people who had stage chops, but could do film acting, they could do both. Well, you and I had worked with Annette Bening on Lear, so I got to know her a little bit then, and we made The Seagull the next summer. But then I got to see her completely in her wheelhouse. Element. And she was the engine behind that production. I mean, she's the reason it got made. And she just was a great leader in that production because of what she brought. And like I said, she would be trying to work it up, in between, when we were waiting for them to light or whatever, or standing outside in the heat. And she just really kept the spirit of that movie going. And that was a great deal of fun. And I like the classics in general, so there's no reason not to put them on film. In fact, when I was asked to do that camera acting class, and it relates back to what you asked me about film acting, I thought it would be interesting to do a class where you do Shakespeare and do it for the stage, as you would, just in a workshop, and then do it for the camera, and see.
That always blows my mind, because it seems almost completely makes sense given monologues and soliloquies to that a camera comes and you talk, but it's so much harder. I whenever that happens, you feel that you're so comfortable with Shakespeare, you're like, great, and you've done film and camera, great, but I think it's a medium that should work. And I think if Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be very excited about seeing his stuff put on film, the ability to turn to a camera and tell everyone what you're feeling, But I don't know, I'm still navigating that one. I've had a couple come up for films for Shakespeare, and I'm still sort of navigating how to do that,
Well, the reason I said that about doing it both ways is that, I like to work on things as though I'm doing them for the stage and then throw it away.
Oh, this is even when you're doing film stuff. This is even when you're doing film and TV. Okay, explain that.
Particularly with Shakespeare, because sometimes it feels like it requires your whole body to sort of get that poetry. It feels so big, but to be able to like get that out of your system and express it in its largeness, and then throw all that away and just say it directly to the camera. And we've all seen there have been successful adaptations on screen. They don't all work. You can definitely see the challenges when people have tried to do it, but there can be incredible moments. Certainly, the problem with it, particularly with Shakespeare, is that, so much cutting happens.
Yes.
And then, because you have to leave time for the beautiful shots of the panorama, and, make it very filmic. And, you can take certain lines isolated. I remember Mel Gibson saying like, now I could drink hot blood.
Yeah. I thought that was an excellent Hamlet, by the way. I thought he was an excellent Hamlet on film.
I liked him, but the problem was the play was cut so much.
Yes.
We're losing certain layers of, what you're interpreting. They try to do it with images to very success in different films. But I miss, because I'm a lover of that language, as I know you are, the layers of that, because there's so much cutting has to happen, and that just kind of hurts me once you know that.
When you know what was there, you took that line out, really? Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about, because one of the questions, I do have one or two questions that crop up in every session, and that is my album allegory. In the picture in an album, when people set up an album, you only see the pictures, the smiley pictures and the happy pictures, or the destination pictures. But there's all those little gaps in between that we don't see in the pictures that get us to those smiley moments. So thinking about your career and the success you've had, and I think it's important for people watching that this concept of you've made it is kind of like a false concept in many ways. Tell us a little bit about the times, Glenn, when maybe things weren't so rosy, and how you got through them and what your focus was,
Well, it's funny.
If you can remember them. I know it's been so long for you, but
I you say that because I only think about the gaps. I mean, that's when I think of my career, I think about the gaps, the pain, the suffering, the struggle. When I heard you list all those things I did at the beginning of this interview, I thought, oh, right, I've done all that, because I'm left with all the scars and listen, I recognize I'm very fortunate to have had a lot of great experiences and to have been able to sustain myself in the really one of the hardest businesses there are. But really, it's about the stamina and the commitment. I mean, that passion I had that I talked about, the hunger when I auditioned for acting school, and was there since I was a baby. That's really what's carried me through more than anything else, more than talent or, connections. I mean, I really came into this with knowing nobody in this business, I still don't really understand how showbiz works. But I think it's my desire more than anything to do it. And I think if you have that, if you can visualize a life for yourself, and whether in the theater or on film or both, or in the arts in any way, then you can do it, but it took me many, many years to get to that understanding. When suddenly started to click, and I thought it's happening, like I said, on Broadway, where I was like, oh, it's like I drew it up, or every once in a while I've had these things click into place where I think like, this is like I imagined it, where for so many years it wasn't happening that way. And really the secret to the whole thing was surviving those times, I wish I'd known then what I know now, that like, it is
giving yourself a bit more of a break.
It's all, your mind is so important. This is something I teach my son all the time, that it's like, if you think a thing, it is that way. But it took me a long time to get there. I was, like everybody else, capable of a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of frustration. I didn't have anything to fall back on. I didn't have a side job that could keep me going. I didn't feel there was something else I could do. I think if there is, you should do it. I think if you can make your own work, you should do that. But I didn't have that. I didn't feel like I was a writer. I would sometimes try to stop and think like, is there something I can generate for myself? So it really became about, how to get the job, how to keep going, how to get up from the disappointment and get on to the next one, and to do good work. And I do believe that the best way to sustain yourself is to do good work. It should be about the work, not about who you know, not about becoming friends with casting directors. Yes, there's all those kind of things in the business, and you know, everyone finds their own way through the businessy part of it, which I was very slow in getting to, because I didn't want to. If it was a business, I wanted it to be purely about the art form. And I think eventually we all learn the way that we are businessmen, you know, in whatever sense, because most of us don't start from the business end of it. We start from the part of it and the dreamer part of it. But really, I've always believed that the first focus should be the work. And that's the thing that's going to get you more work, taking pride in that, pushing yourself to do more, to be better, to be challenged by things. In terms of taking roles, you know, roles that will challenge you, not letting yourself be put into a box, which you know, people have tried to do to me, certainly. And that's been a very important thing to me, because a lot of acting for me is about transformation, about trying to understand other people, other kinds of people. And when you're young and you can do it and you can, you know, afford to do it, just absorb, you know, study people, try things out. You know, a lot of the work you do is really about what you're interested in at that time. If you get the role, it's probably because something clicked with you that you were interested in. Bring something to the table, to the set, to the rehearsal, that is your experiment, what you're interested in. We spend so much time as actors thinking, you know, what do they want? What do they want? How am I going to get cast? But you know, you're better served spending more time thinking, what do I want? What do I have to say? You know, what is it specific about my upbringing, my life, my family, my pain that I can share with people that might connect? It's in those specifics that you will connect with people and communicate.
It's funny, like you, so many of my guests, when I've asked that question, have come back to that thing, Glenn, of stop trying to think, ask yourself, what do they want? Stop trying to second guess. You know, you have all this training and you've worked so hard to create out of your imagination. We sort of let that go to the side as we start focusing on, oh, I saw this person's show, or I think I'm that character from that show, so I'll give them that, instead of, do you know what I mean, making a personal association with the role, you know what I mean? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, you know, and for me, I was always resistant to the idea of self, because, you know, I was an actor that kind of worked outside in, particularly in my early days. But it all comes back to you. Ultimately, if you click and it's truthful, even if you're doing, you know, like in acting school, we used to do mask work and do these big, you know, you put a mask on your face and find these characters, and I would do these wild characters, and people would really respond. But ultimately, it comes from you. It's just freeing something in you, that mask. You know, that's why it's incredible education to do that kind of work.
I mean, your family, you know, Nathaniel, and I remember meeting him when he was tiny in Lear, and you being just a doting dad. Has he affected some of your choices you make as an actor?
Well, he is most of my actual acting work. You know, there's all the work that you guys see, but most of my time is spent, you know, reading to him. And that's where I get most of my acting in now, is reading to him. We read endlessly, and luckily he's a great captive audience.
Yeah.
For me and my wife and my in-laws who are actors read to him. That's something great that they do on Zoom every day. So he is fully immersed in Storyland, and so that can be a great reminder of the basic elements of story and storytelling, is to have to communicate with a child. So yeah, he's a part of it, and the best part about it is, you know, having a kid gives you the perspective that, you know, all the other stuff is the second most important thing, because I was so single-minded for so many years, and it was so important to me, the work. To have something that makes all of that slightly less important is a good thing for someone like me, certainly.
Yeah. So let me come back to, given that when we yes, the two things that I guess completely blanked on Richard II, but the two things we've worked on together have been Shakespeare. And, you know, I remember my brother who passed away. I remember when we were kids in Nigeria, we got a copy of, was it Nigeria or Ethiopia? And we were watching a copy of The Untouchables. And I remember Danny, pointing out De Niro, who's only in not many scenes in that movie, but just saying, this actor, and I guess he'd seen him in, Godfather stuff. I hadn't seen him, but seen him, and he just goes that. I remember him saying, it doesn't matter what he's playing. He just plays it to the full. I remember that as a kid, him saying that long before I'd formed the idea of becoming an actor even. And that was a classic example. And again, and I often, this is not to, blow steam off your ass, but I often think that of you. I really think you fill out every pore that characters have. And that's why we ultimately remember your scenes, because you were playing, when we first met when we first worked on a full play in Lear, I just remember the gouging of Gloucester's eyes. Do you know what I mean? And I remember that whole sequence of scenes. And then I remember how you tried to be understanding of Lear. You tried to be gracious, but then when the beast came out, it just came out to the full, and then it was gone. And then I just remember that. So can you I'm just intrigued as a student of you, I am. That whole thing of take the example of that cliche thing, there's no small roles, only small actors. When you come to a role, however big or small, whether it's a cameo, whatever, or lead, you know what I mean? I'm think of Joker, you in the Joker, the fullness of that bully that you play. How do you encourage people to understand there's always something to be mined out of a role? It's not about the number of pages and stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's just what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the human that's there, and a lot of times in the industry, those characters can be thrown away, whether it's in the casting or the directing or, the time that production has to deal with the smaller roles. But you, as the actor, it's your job to advocate for that character. There has to be a whole world behind that person. And I guess it's just from practice of having played a lot of small parts, and for people not knowing what to do with me early on in my career, and me not exactly knowing, because I wanted to do everything, it was hard to figure out what specifically I should be doing or what parts were going to be right for me. And so I did a little bit of everything. And like I said, had to play all these multiple parts, and I approached it like a cobbler, or like making a table or something, where you just craft it, you just look for as much as you can. Your first commitment is to listen to the writer. And hopefully if you have good writing, like you do in Shakespeare, there's a lot of information there. That's the first thing. Then you go to your own life, you start to try to look for connections. You just dream on it as much as you possibly can to fill out the world and try to love that person. And on King Lear specifically, I'd actually played that role. I did Lear 5 times, and that.
So have I. I've done 5.
You did. And that role I had done the first time I had ever done it. I didn't really want to do it again. I got talked into doing it, and luckily I had a great time. But I think the main part of that experience for me was working with Jessica Hecht, who I know you interviewed.
Yes.
And just us crafting a very specific relationship that I wasn't quite expecting, because we got along so well, and it became a kind of loving relationship. I think the director tried to steer it away from that, because directors like to take those characters and wink and say like, oh, she's really eyeing Edmund before Cornwall's even dead, or and I thought, here you have something in front of you which is unique, which is like, this is actually like a hot relationship.
They get off on this stuff, Yeah.
So, and then something else happens later. He dies and she goes to Edmund. So anyway, I was a little at odds with that in that production, but I thought just what Jessica and I found naturally. Sometimes, you luck out, like we talked about with Barry, you don't know what you're going to do. And then you find the person and you're like, well, this is better than anything I could have come up with, this person. So that was the main thing there. I know that the first time I had played Cornwall, the director had me watch Triumph of the Will, the Hitler film. That
Right, yeah.
All made. So I was doing a lot of that. We were in leather, and it was a different kind of production, you know. So maybe there were some vestiges of that, but mostly it was just from yeah, what we found there. And, you know, John Lithgow is such a specific Lear, and, you know, you find it from the people that you're working with.
I think that's the main thing, that side of every performance, which has to happen when you turn up and open yourself up to the people in front of you. Do you know what I mean? Because there's only so much you can imagine and plan and work on, and then you have this other realm of your co-stars, you know, people opposite you. Yeah.
But I really believe that actors should work very hard. You know, there is this whole kind of myth about like, oh, we're gonna get on set and we're gonna wing it, like in Barry or like in anything. But the reason you can wing it, the reason you can do great improv, whether it's Goron and NoHo Hank, or it's finding specificity in
Cornwall,
Regan and Cornwall,
yeah,
is because you've done the homework, which is to really know your character and dig and imagine. Now, some of that may go out the window. And like I said, meeting Jessica or working with Dan Sullivan on that show, some things may fall by the wayside, or going to set in True Detective and him saying like, I'm not interested in that. And I go, okay, I have to recalibrate the story now.
I have
to fight for it. I have to fight for my choice. And sometimes I have done that because I believe in it so deeply, or you zag. But the fact is, if you've done the homework, it's much easier to get on set or on stage and let it all go. And that is the point of homework, is to be freed, not to be bound by a bunch of preconceived choices that you've made. I'm telling you stuff that you know, but
no, we're sharing it with everyone. And sometimes I know I like to hear things again. Anyway, I could talk to you forever, Glenn, but it's time for Q&As. We've got some guests who have some questions, and Michelle is telling me we got to switch the questions, and she runs my life right now. So, Michelle, questions.
Okay, questions. This is from Johanna. Since For Life is based on a true story, what kind of research did you do, and did you base your character on anyone actually in the prison system?
Oh, that's a great question. And one I'm excited to talk about, because you might think going into a network show that you wouldn't do a lot of research, but I felt, because for those who don't know, I play a captain in a prison, and I felt going into that show that I couldn't feel authentic if I didn't do research and find out what it was like to live that life. And sometimes I reach a character, in fact, a lot of the characters I play, because they're either authoritarian or they're really evil, or, I play a lot of intense characters. I feel I have to make that reach. A lot of the characters I play, I don't understand how they do what they do. So it's an opportunity for me to dive into a world that I don't know. It's very hard for me to imagine what it's like to work in a prison. Part of that was helped by the fact that we worked in prisons to shoot the show. So I had access to corrections officers and wardens and deputy wardens, and got to talk to some people, particularly when we were making the pilot. But I read a lot of books. And luckily there are some incredibly brave reporters who wrote books where they couldn't find out what was going on in prisons, because nobody wants to talk about that. And so they went undercover basically and went through the training program to become corrections officers and documented it and spent many months as corrections officers. And there's a great one that takes place in Sing Sing where we shot the For Life pilot. And the thing that most connected me to the character was a scene early on in one of the books where there's like a real hard ass, I think he's a captain or he might have been a major in the prison, who's training these guys at the beginning. And he's just a very tough customer, and the reporter doesn't really relate to him. And then all of a sudden there's a day where they have a meeting and the guy sits them all down and he says, "This is your one chance to ask me what it's like to be held hostage." And they can tell from the way he's talking to them that he has been in a situation where the prisoners took over the prison and held him hostage and tortured him. And that was basically my entree into the seriousness and the danger that these people are living with. Because it's easy, particularly in a story like For Life, where we're so much with Aaron Wallace, the protagonist, based on a real man who was wrongly imprisoned. It's obviously our sympathies are there when we watch the show. But my job is to bring an entire world to this corrections officer, this captain, who turns out to be a crooked captain who's dealing drugs. And unbeknownst to me, not to spoil the show, but at some point he does end up in somewhat of a hostage situation in the show, which I didn't know that was coming. I never discussed my research with the creator of the show, but it gave me an opportunity to go. That's why when I referred to sitting and listening with headphones and having to stay in this place, I had to carry what happened to me in episode 6, say, through episode 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, basically everything that happened to that character subsequently was spun off from the fact that he had gone through this experience. So it was kind of a kismet thing.
Wow, good question there, Joanna. Thank you. Next one.
Next one, this is from Kinetta. Knowing what you know now, what would you say to your younger self a year or so after leaving a training program?
I would say it's all going to be okay. You know, it's all going to be okay. You're going to survive. I think a lot of it in the early years for me was about survival, you know, getting through those long periods where I wasn't working. And most people looked at me as somebody who worked all the time. But for me, all the time meant 5, 6, 7 months where I wasn't working during a year, because you get a few theater jobs and then in between there's months. And at that time I was doing everything. I mean, I was doing everybody's directing project and anything anybody offered me, you know, every reading I could get my hands on to keep working and keep practicing my craft. And of course you also have to get to know people in the industry and them get to know you. But there was this existential fear, which some of you might relate to right now, about, you know, how am I going to make it, and am I going to make it, and how am I going to eat, and all of those things. Where am I going to live? And I went a long time sort of moving from place to place. So it was very nerve-wracking time. So I have a lot of empathy for young actors starting out, where there's a lot of unknown. But that mental thing I talked about before, that's what I would tell myself, to just believe it even stronger, and don't let all the negativity in. Because, you know, a lot of negativity comes at you, particularly from the rejection of not getting jobs, and then the number you do on yourself. That's the toughest part, is the number you do on yourself.
The stories we tell ourselves. Thoughts have power. Yeah. That's a great answer. Michelle, next question.
Yeah, this one is from Ben. As an actor, there is a large pressure to focus on energy on social media, as it is now being used as a casting tool. If you were starting out now, how would you navigate this space, or would you even engage with it?
That's a wonderful question, because I don't want to engage with it. And I have had some pressure to engage with it, and I have dabbled, and I realized it's not for me. If I was younger, I probably would feel more pressure, or maybe I would just be better at it. Because it would be part of my world, the way younger actors, you know, you've come up with it. It's been a part of it. You know, I got to Broadway and was shocked when I was in Spring Awakening, because it was the beginnings of people putting everything on YouTube. And there were just phones up in the audience. I mean, that was shocking to me, having come up in the theater, that there were just people recording on their phones and then putting it up online, and everybody commenting on us. And every single show had comments, you know, and there were people, that particular show, people were coming again and again. I mean, you know, and I've heard actors like on the show Billions that I do, there was an actor, very established, wonderful actor, and he was talking to an actress here. We were all talking, and he was saying, oh, you've got to be on social media, because she didn't really do it. She's like, you know, you can get jobs that way, and some people will look at your numbers of followers and blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, no, you don't. You don't have to. There, to some people, if you're comfortable with that, it can help you. There are certainly people who know how to use it to their advantage, but I believe in my privacy. I want my work to speak for itself, and I don't want to be tweeting along with the show and whatever. And luckily, I've never been forced to. I mean, nobody's ever said, if you do this job, you have to live tweet the show or anything like that. For instance, I've been on Billions for 5 years, and there are a handful of people on that show, including some of the creative team, that tweet all the time, and they you know, they love that part of it. And there's people taking video behind the scenes, and that's just not for me. In fact, on For Life, people were trying to do that, and I respectfully asked them not to video me off set. I want my work to
speak for itself. I always find it, I mean, I'm someone that without Michelle, and I wouldn't even know how to post the posts I do every week without my wife checking them and Michelle running this thing. So for me, it's a very easy choice. Like, I finally got on Instagram, I think it was just last year or something like that. And I still, I don't know. I come from the old school belief that for a show like this, I see the value of it for something like this, spreading the word to people and stuff like that. But that idea that might be how you get work, I don't think I would want to get work out of someone that decided to cast me because of your followers. That I think that says something about the work.
For you, and you know how to make it work for you, God bless. I think you should do it. I think if you're feeling pressured into it, or that you have to do it, again, it goes back to my earlier answer, which is let the work speak for you. If you're working, get your work out there. But if it works for you, I don't know, people starting out now, I imagine it's
so natural for people starting out now that it's not. It doesn't even, it took a big decision for me to decide to do it. I don't think it's a big decision for people starting out now. I think it's so part of everything now, Anyway, Michelle, next question. I know we're running over a bit. I just know there's so many ego questions. We'll take a couple more.
Yeah, I don't expect that you'll ever be posting regularly either, given how much you hate it. Okay, this question is from Aaron. As an actor, how have you found the experience of working on video games? Any particular challenges or insights you've discovered by working in that medium?
Oh, well, I haven't done any of that for a while. I did a little voice work on it, and I did one, what do they call it? Where you wear the green dots, motion capture. Just at the kind of beginning of that, and then I haven't done it again. I don't really want to do it again, but it's perfectly fine. It's, I think the problem with that is it's a business thing, but there's not a real great union protection for that. So you're not making residuals, or so some of these games become so popular and you don't see a piece of it. You get a session fee and that's it. But it's perfectly fine work. I like using my voice, and so any kind of animation. You don't get to do as much of that when you live in New York. Most of that happens in LA. I've been told that my whole career. So to have the opportunity to do something like that, particularly early on, was fun, and a couple of them were pretty big, successful games. So it was nice to be a part of. But I haven't pursued any of that recently.
Cool. Okay, final question.
Yeah. Final question. This is from Ben, a different Ben. What do you do in a long run to keep your performance fresh? Is it about shifting your preparation or adjusting your approach on stage?
Yeah, good question. Mostly it happens on stage, but every day is different. And I do remember the feeling of being backstage and going like, oh, how am I going to do this tonight? There is that thing you have to fight against where it just becomes work. Luckily, the audience has a lot to say about that. Once you get out there and you're in front of 5 human beings and your adrenaline's going, the show kind of takes over. But I think the key thing that I would say is breath, is to breathe. And sometimes to breathe in places where you didn't breathe yesterday. To change up your rhythm. That's very important, to let something new in, because you can easily get set in structures. Some of the people in Broadway musicals got frustrated with me because they want that sameness every night, because there's musicality to it, particularly musical performers. A lot of them want, the same rhythm every night, even in the book scenes. I was never going to give that to them. And because I had, taken over a role that someone else had created, I was going to find it in front of the audience every night and refine it. And sometimes you find something that works and you try to hold on to it, but you also have to be willing to let it go on any given night. Even if you've nailed a joke 6 times in a row, for me, now other people would tell you otherwise, but for me, I'm like, you have to be willing to maybe break an egg here or there so that something new can happen. Otherwise you are in a kind of frozen performance.